both in the United States and in France, to sort of, really bring this thing to life, give it a great sense of place, get into the characters and the steps that we took to do that. And then we'll wrap up by telling you kind of where we are now and the next steps. And then we'd be happy to take questions for as long as you've got them, or until you're done listening to us. So we will jump right in. Since we did this in alphabetical order, it's not that I'm on top because I'm the best, but I'm on top. So starting with me, I guess we could each introduce ourselves very briefly. In terms of the film, I'm co-writer, co-director, and one of the producers of the film. Thank you for the nice mention about the music. I also arranged the music for the film too. But I've been involved with aviation projects for many, many years, but also art projects. I kind of wear two hats. I was trained as a painter and worked for many years in art museums. And at the moment, I've been doing an online series of lectures for the Smithsonian called Art Plus History, looking at single works of art in their whole historical context. So a lot of French art with that. But this project was one that kind of brought the three of us together in a very good team. I'll throw it to Derek.
Yeah, I've been making historical documentaries for television for a number of years, working on them and directing and producing them. I've also worked in museums for 5 years. I was the researcher for the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum in Springfield, Illinois. I was the liaison between our design team in Los Angeles and the Illinois Historical Preservation Association and the historian there. That was very satisfying. Previous to the Lafayette Escadrille, I made a documentary called The Millionaires Unit, which was about a group of Yale students who formed their own flying club at Yale and became the founding squadron of the US Naval Air Reserve. And that's what got me interested in World War I and in aviation. Compared to Paul and Dan, I'm rather a newbie in that regard, but the Lafayette Escadrille was a great continuation to do a much larger story on a bigger canvas. And I'm a Francophile, and I really just wanted to do it so I could go to France.
Yes, we're all guilty of that.
Wanting to go to France, yeah. Well, and I'm Dan Patterson. I'm one of the producers and the art director of the film. I met Derek in Paris when we started on this project, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Yeah. I've been a photographer and a designer my whole life. Published over 40 books, mostly about aviation history. But my newest book will be out next week on George Washington's birthday, and it's about George Washington and his life as a surveyor and mapping early America, which is a fascinating project to work on. But working with these two guys has been one of the high points of my career. We had a lot of fun. We did go to Paris. They went more than once, but we ate a lot of great food and it was one of the best projects I've ever had the pleasure to work on.
I do have to take issue with Dan and Paul because they threw my stinky cheese out of the car. They just, after 2 days, they couldn't take it anymore.
Yes, I actually have a photograph of that moment.
That was, yeah.
They did it behind my back. Okay, here we are in Harry's New York bar. I hope a number of you have been there. It is located at 5 Rue Danube. I forget what arrondissement, but it opened in 1913, I believe, right before the war, and became a watering hole for expat Americans. And the Lafayette Escadrille hung out there. And so, of course, we wanted to go there and film the making of the cocktail they invented, the French 75. So we met Jerry, the bartender, and I said, can you make the French 75? Very simple, half champagne, half cognac, named for the largest shell of the big French guns. And Jerry said, no, I can't do that. I said, no, it's very simple, just half champagne, half cognac. No, I can't do that. That's not the French 75. And I said, I have it right here in Ted Parsons' book, I Flew with the Lafayette Escadrille, page 101. William Thaw should have had at least one more medal. With Lufberry, he was the inventor and chief exponent of that very dynamic concoction known as the Lafayette cocktail. Aha, there is the difference. Jerry said, oh, I can make that. Yeah, the Lafayette cocktail. It was composed of equal parts brandy and champagne. The soothing mixture with the kick of a mule brought thaw and many another good man down where the Boche failed. And so without further ado, I've got my champagne glass in front of me. And I don't recommend doing half and half. It really is a powerful drink. And we learned that the first few happy hours we did. So I would do maybe a quarter cognac and pour the cognac in first.
Yes.
So that it gets mixed with the champagne
So I'm
and
gonna,
doesn't become a floater. And you all at home, maybe we can all pop a cork at the same time.
We already
I
popped
already
ours.
did.
I think they're already ahead of you, Derek. Oh,
Voila.
there we go.
Aha. I'd like to raise a toast to the memory of the Lafayette Escadrille, the Paris American Club, and thank you for having us. Oh, I'm waiting for John. Hold on.
Okay, here we go.
There he
Here we go.
is.
Here we
Santé.
go. And in the Paris American Club has a traditional toast, which we start all of our in-person meetings with, and that is we raise a glass to the health of the President of the United States of America and to the President of the French Republic.
Here,
I
here.
can gladly drink to that.
Cheers.
Santé.
Very good.
So we officially started this documentary in April of 2016, April 16th, I believe, the day before my birthday. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, first, this is just us on the Chemin des Dames, where there was a battle that Kiffin Rockwell took part in that we filmed. We went to this old chateau, which was very hard to find, but the view from the Chemin des Dames over northern France, northwest of Paris, northeast of Paris is just spectacular. So here we were on the first day. The first money we got was from the Florence Gould Foundation, and we got it just in time to get to Paris for the centennial rededication of the Lafayette Escadrille Memorial, which took place on the centennial anniversary. This is the day before. We shot some beauty shots before everybody showed up.
Yeah, here's this is the day of the anniversary, and for the first time, the descendants of these pilots gathered and actually met each other, many for the very first time. Some of the family members met other family members for the very first time. So it was a really remarkable day for us in many ways. Not only was it the celebration of the centennial of the squadron, the memorial is beautifully restored, but we got to listen to these families meet each other and talk about their ancestors, the pilots that are memorialized at that spot. And it was a pretty cool thing for us to experience. We did a portrait, and one descendant who showed up, who was not related to the squadron, was a descendant of the Marquis de Lafayette, who was a very fascinating woman to talk to, who said she wouldn't have missed this opportunity to celebrate the centennial of the squadron named for her ancestor. It was really wonderful moment.
There were also American and French descendants of Raoul Lufberry, the two
Yes.
different sides of his family.
Yes. Just out of curiosity, it's kind of hard to do a show of hands. I know we can all do the little virtual hand raising here, but I'm sure some of you are familiar with this memorial. It's in Marne-la-Coquette. It's sort of halfway between Paris and Versailles, and it's it had fallen into very bad disrepair, but the French and American governments came together, and it was moved, not physically, but the organization was moved from the private foundation that had taken care of the memorial from its inception to the American Battlefield Monument Commission. And so now it belongs to the US government, who will be taking care of it forever. And the restoration is just absolutely beautiful. It's a very moving place to go.
And if you have not been there, there is a crypt beneath it with 56 sarcophagi, only of which I think 42 have the remains of pilots who flew for the Escadrille and other American pilots who flew for French squadrons. That is their resting place.
Ooh.
So here are some of the family members we met. And, Paul will mention this, I'm sure. He did a really great job of tracking down people all over America to really get as close as we could, not firsthand testimony of what happened, but really to hear from the families of these historic pilots, many of whom did not survive the war. So in the upper left-hand corner is Guillaume de Ramel. He is a pilot. He is the great-grandnephew of Norman Prince. He has a twin brother, equally as handsome, and he is in front of a plane that he built himself. He flies a T-6, World War II era plane. To his right is Carolyn Bridgman Reese, and she is the daughter of Ray Bridgman, who joined late in the war. He was very good friends with James Norman Hall, and he was a committed pacifist. He went to, I think his idea was to drive for the ambulance corps, but he got there and he realized that he really needed to fight for France. And in spite of remaining a pacifist, he shot down 4 German planes. And once the Escadrille transferred over to the American Air Service, he was a squadron commander of the 22nd. I can't remember what number they were, but a very conflicted man who in the end committed suicide in 1950. He just could not come to terms with himself and with the war. Right below him is Nick Rutgers. He is the great grandson of James Norman Hall. He is also a 4th generation fighter pilot, James Norman Hall, in the Lafayette Escadrille in World War I. His grandfather was in World War II, and his father fought in Vietnam. Actually, Nick has just retired from being squadron commander of the Oregon National Guard and just took a job flying for UPS. To our left, his right, is Alexandra Truitt, and she is the great grandniece of Jim McConnell. And she is a lovely woman. We really had a great time with her in New York City. But she's also from a family that the legacy of the Lafayette Escadrille was really tough on. Her father really suffered from his sister, who looked up to her brother, Jim McConnell, who died in the war, and just nobody was really good enough in her eyes. I'm sorry, it was her son. She is the grandniece. So her father suffered a great deal from having a mother that just was still wrapped up in the legacy of the Lafayette Escadrille and how rough the war was on the family. Here in France are some of the people we met and interviewed. In the upper left-hand corner, you see Paul there bending over a map, and to his left is General Daniel Bastien. He is a 4-star Air Force general and an historian, and he is from the town of Corcieux, right near where Norman Prince crashed and had his fatal accident. And he was very helpful in us locating where he crashed and in doing work. And since then, he's been doing a lot of other work on markers regarding World War I aviation in that area. Right below him is Colonel Jean-Patrice Lasainte, and he is the commander of the air base at Luxeuil-les-Bains, which is where the Lafayette Escadrille first served. And the air base at Luxeuil was built just before World War I. And it was just far enough away from the Western Front that the Lafayette Escadrille could get their feet wet. But we had complete access to the base and to film all over it, even with their Mirage jets taking off, some of which we got on film. He was a lovely man. He had us over for dinner, and his family had lived in Maryland for I think 8 years. I can't remember what they were doing, but over dinner I had to listen to Jean-Patrice and Paul talk about where to buy the best bagels in Silver Spring, Maryland, which was quite a hoot. To your right, in the lower right-hand corner, is Jean-Marc Simon. He is another amateur historian in the town of Ham, H-A-M, and that is a base where the Escadrille had a particularly hard time. 4 of the pilots lost their lives there. And but Jean-Patrice is standing in front of the airfield. A large part of that airfield is still there, and he described the events that happened 100 years ago. And above them, outside the town of Roederer, are Andre and Michelle Spetz, also amateur historians, experts on Kiffin Rockwell, whose plane crashed about 100 yards over their left shoulder behind them. They've written a children's book about Kiffin Rockwell, and they were really lovely people. We had a great lunch with them on a lovely day, which Paul will tell us more about later.
Excuse me.
And here we are with Paul down in the trenches, interviewing another Air Force general, 2-star Brigadier General Yvon Gute, who is past president of the Lafayette Association. And though that association are veterans that were members of the French Escadrille Lafayette, which is named for the American Lafayette Escadrille. And they still hold that name, and they still do annual ceremonies at sites where the Escadrille served and where some of them died. And he was a lovely man, and we saw him later on in Dayton, Ohio.
Oops, excuse me. I'll take it from here for a little bit and talk about the locations that we filmed. We felt it was very important for us to, especially for our American audiences, to introduce France itself as a character. The story happened there. It didn't happen here. It happened in France. World War I is largely a forgotten war in the United States. We joined the war quite late into it. The main action of the US was in the sort of last 6 months. The soldiers returned home relatively quickly, and there was a grand pandemic that was going on, and life moved on.
No,
And so we,
no.
sorry. Anyway, so we felt it very important to have to go to locations as precisely as we could where the Escadrille was in service. So here is myself and Darroch, again with General Bastien, and our cinematographer Mathieu Maza, who is born and raised in France, but has become an American citizen, lives very close to me here in Maryland, outside DC. And where we're standing is the site of where Norman Prince, we're standing on the spot where Norman Prince crashed. General Bastien worked out the precise location using electrical grid maps, because Norman hit the electric power wires and flipped over. That's how his plane crashed. He looked at the electrical grid maps from the time. He looked at topographical maps of the time and the photographs that were taken at the crash. And that house behind us, standing there, that yellow house is in one of the photographs. And with all this data, he was able to put us in the parking lot of the President brand President cheese factory there in Corsieux.
They let us film there, but did not give us any brie.
No, indeed. So we used Google Earth extensively before we went over to France. You know, we had money to shoot, but we didn't have an unlimited budget. We couldn't just roam around or do a big expensive scouting trip. So we did our scouting with Google Earth. And so these dots that you see are the main locations where we went to film. The actual map that shows everywhere the Lafayette Escadrille was is much more extensive than this. But you can see there's a cluster around Paris. And then you see them really stretching from one end of the Western Front to the other. They did actually go all the way to Dunkirk. We did not film there, as Darroch had already filmed there for his previous film. So you can see the breadth of where we went. We are extremely grateful to Google Earth and the satellites that take these pictures for us, as much as we are grateful to the German observation pilots, reconnaissance pilots, and photographers of the First World War, because they wanted to bomb the Lafayette Escadrille. So they had to go find out where the Lafayette Escadrille and all the other squadrons and all the gun emplacements, as those of you who are familiar with World War I know, photo reconnaissance was one of the most important uses of the airplane in the war. Photographing and locating where guns were, where troops were, where airfields were, so that artillery and airplanes and soldiers could be pointed in the right places to take on the other side. So fortunately for us, a lot of these photographs still exist, and the German photographs of the Lafayette Escadrille airfields match up perfectly to Google Earth satellite images. And this is a great example. This is the little village of Bayonne, which sits on a plateau just across the river from the city of Bar-le-Duc. And
Bar-le-Duc is in the lower left-hand corner and Bayonne is in the upper right.
so this is what I did to to superimpose one of their, the German reconnaissance photographs on the satellite image. And what I was mostly looking at, if you can see where my cursor is moving along, what I'm mostly looking at is to see where roads connect, roads that might still exist today. Are they in the photograph? And the answer is yes. Here's a good example. If you see that little hook right there, you will see that that little hook is in the photograph, where these two roads are coming together and the fork in the road is right here. We see that in the Google Earth image. We see it in the antique image. Over here on the side, the borderline, this tree line right here, it's still there. So these clues were wonderful for us because we can see in the photograph right here, that's the airfield. Those are the hangars and the other buildings. There's a little farmhouses across the street. The farmhouses are still there. So this is the airfield. And if we look at it today, we see that that airfield, part of it is now a housing development, but right here is still a field. So when we went to this spot, we knew exactly to go right here. And that's where we flew our drone across the airfield in the direction of Verdun, because this was the airfield that they flew out of to go fight over the Battle of Verdun. And this is, so we're giving our audience the same view that the pilots had in 1916. Now, we could have shot that anywhere, but for us, again, to bring that place in France home truly was very important. Similarly, just down the street from that is one of the villas that the Escadrille was housed in when they first went to this airfield. We were able to find this because we happened to have lunch in Bar-le-Duc, Dan and Darroch and I, and we were asking about where this house may be, and we were pointed to the local photography shop where the owner was a local historian. And in our terrible French and his equally terrible English, we managed to work out that there were two houses and it had to be one of those two. And one of them was completely overgrown. So we filmed the one that was not, and we were not allowed inside, but we weren't allowed to shoot outside the building. And right around the corner from that was the site of where a well-known photograph of the Lafayette Escadrille at this time was taken. We went there in 2016, but didn't think to walk up this alleyway, turn around and see this site. It wasn't until General Bastien, again, using Google Earth himself, worked out where this picture was taken. So we went and filmed right there, and I will jump back and forth. So this is the picture from 1916. There it is in 2017. And what we're seeing in this picture, and it's significant for our story, because right there in the center, the man with the cigarette and the cane and all the medals, that is Charles Nungesser. one of the top scoring aces of France in the First World War. And he had suffered several accidents and numerous broken bones. At this point, there was very little of the original Nungesser left. His whole mouth was full of gold teeth. He'd broken his jaw just prior to this. But he was such, his character was such that while he was recovering from his injuries, his latest round of injuries, he went and flew with this American squadron over Verdun. That's how he recuperated. So they were in the presence of greatness while this was going on. On the far left of the picture, you see Norman Prince looking back at the camera. And on the right, you see Didier Masson, who was one of the French-born members of the Lafayette Escadrille, but who had come to the United States early in aviation's infancy. So again, just a then and now moment that really kind of helps us bring the story to life. Darroch mentioned Roderin, the little town in eastern France, where right where Kiffin Rockwell was killed. And we went there because we knew that there was a little annual presentation that was made in the park Kiffin Rockwell, where there was a marker to him very near to where his airplane crashed. And so we went to go shoot it. And we were really very moved by what we saw. This is a photograph I took while their ceremony was going on. And I will tell you that they did not do this for the camera. They didn't set up anything special for us. This is what they were doing anyway. We filmed what they were already doing, what they do every year. Honoring the memory of Kiffin Rockwell, honoring veterans of the French military of today who are receiving commendations and medals. There were speeches about the Franco-American friendship and history and alliance. The young people in the background of the photograph with the light blue shirts, those are teenagers from a high school in Michigan. And every year their school band goes on a tour of France and they come to Roderin and they perform the Star Spangled Banner and the Marseillaise at this ceremony. It was a really extraordinary moment. And it just brought home for us how these memories stay alive. This is a moment of, really showing the glamour and the exciting life of being a documentary filmmaker. You see my hand holding up a cheap umbrella to keep the camera dry in the pouring rain at Verdun. We had come from the baking heat of Paris in July out to the cold rain of Verdun. Fortunately for us, the terrible weather drove everybody away from the battlefield, so we pretty much had it to ourselves to film there. And for our French-born cinematographer, he had actually never been to Verdun, and he was incredibly moved by it. And when Dan and Derek and I visited there in 2016 for the very first time, speaking personally, I can say that's when I first got a feeling in my bones about the First World War, about the scope of it, about how terrible it was, about the impact of it. Just seeing the battlefield at Verdun, seeing the destroyed villages, the vanished villages, seeing the old forts of Douaumont and Vaux, and it was incredibly moving. So and Verdun, just because of its importance in the war and its importance to the Lafayette Escadrille, we had to go there and film. Here we are outside the little village of Flavy-la-Martelle. And what you're looking at in the right is video that we shot of the site on the left. The site on the left is the original grave of Jim McConnell. Derek mentioned him earlier, one of the founding members of the squadron. McConnell was shot down in the spring of 1917, and he wanted to be buried where he fell. And so that's what you see there on the left is his original grave. You see actually his smashed machine gun. And his body lay there for a long time until it was moved to the memorial that we saw earlier outside Paris. I'm going to just do this slide over again so you can watch that piece of video. Once again, we told no one we were coming to this. This is just a little roadside marker. And although the hedge needs a little bit of a trim up on top, it was beautifully maintained and preserved. And it's on a little tiny country road. And it was, again, something that was very moving to us to see this marker to this American, so well preserved and maintained, and that was something, again, that we really wanted to bring home to our American audiences to, see how this memory is kept alive.
The fact that they spelled his name wrong, we just ignored.
Yeah, we let that one go. Typos, it's okay. So Darroch mentioned the family members and the family stories. Darroch and Dan will tell you now about two New York City natives who are in the Lafayette Escadrille. When we do these presentations, like to bring a little bit of the homegrown talent into the story. So Darroch's going to tell you about Victor Chapman.
Yes, we have here Victor Chapman, one of the seven founding members of the Lafayette Escadrille, and Christopher Ford, who was the last member to join. Both from New York City, one extremely wealthy, one not, one who really grew up on the streets. Victor is related to the Astor family, and he lived upstate. They also had an apartment in New York. And his father was a very erudite writer. And Victor lost his mother when he was 6, and then his little brother drowned in front of him a little while later. And he was a rather I would say, withdrawn and spiritual guy, but everybody loved him. And he was large, muscular, a real worker. When he joined the French Foreign Legion, they thought he had been a professional ditch digger because he dug trenches with such vigor. The portrait, formal portrait on the left, nobody had really seen before. We got this from his great nephew, who also lives in the Washington, D.C. area. The portrait on the right is right after Victor had been wounded in an aerial battle. His screen on his plane, you can see, has been hit by a bullet. He was grazed by a bullet over his head, and you can also see another bullet that has ripped open the fabric on the back of his plane. And he took it all in stride, got back in the plane, and went back up in the air the same day. But 3 days later, he was not nearly so lucky and was shot down and was the first of the Lafayette Escadrille to die. He had only been flying for 2 months. He died at the end of June. Escadrille had formed in April. And there was a memorial service for him on July 4th, 1916. And then they made their annual pilgrimage over to the Picpus Cemetery, where they gave their respects to Lafayette on the same day. And we actually found film of that event, of his memorial service at the American Cathedral in Paris.
Well, and as Paul said, Christopher Ford was born in New York, sort of the opposite end of Victor Chapman, grew up on the streets of New York, was the last member of the Lafayette Escadrille, pretty capable pilot. When I was doing the research for this project at the National Museum of the United States Air Force here in Dayton, they brought out all of his stuff, his logbooks, some of his letters, a lot of photographs of Christopher Ford, and a whole bunch of maps that he used on missions that were very interestingly folded in an accordion fashion, and as he flew over the landscape, all he had to do was unfold the accordion, and that was his mission of the day. And they have all that stuff along with his logbooks of the missions, and they also had a series of comic strips done about World War I pilots done after the war, where he was very liberally illustrated as an American hero who flew for the French. It's a fascinating story. And so these guys bookended, I'm sorry, Paul, bookended the squadron. Victor Chapman is one of the first, and Christopher Ford was the last, and wraps up the story for us.
Yep. Those of you who are attentive to such things as uniforms will see that he's actually wearing an American uniform in this. This photograph was taken after they had transferred to the American Air Service. So the squadron stayed more or less intact for a little while after it transferred to the American Air Service. And but then it split up and went to different squadrons because these guys were the most senior American pilots, fighter pilots at that time. So Ford joined just before that transfer happened. Very interesting guy. You'll see that we were very interested, and as you saw in the 20-minute version, and as you'll see in the full version, getting to primary sources, getting as close to the source of these guys as possible, to, you know, the family members and so on. And it was because of the family members and because of the very helpful museums Dan mentioned, the Air Force Museum in Dayton, the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, the French military archives, and a number of French film archives were incredibly helpful and useful to us. But we also, in working with the families and cultivating those relationships, we were able to find, I think it's 5 original collections of materials that had never been seen before. And probably the most dramatic example, arguably the most dramatic example, is what you're seeing here. This is photographs that were taken by Guillaume de Ramel with his phone when he's opening up for the first time his grandfather's World War I steamer trunk that had been discovered on French eBay. It had gone missing from the family. And a guy in a junk shop in France, not too far from Switzerland, got a hold of this thing, looked at it, saw World War I, posted it on French eBay, wanted a lot of money for it. Guillaume's sister, who lives in Switzerland, went to visit this nice man with a rather burly member of the Swiss military, and they talked him down. There was a negotiation, she did not, and got this material back. It belonged to Frederick Henry Prince Jr., so the brother of Norman Prince, one of the founding members of the squadron, and this was his older brother. And Freddie came over with Norman in early 1916 after Norman had gone in 1915, came back for Christmas break, went back with his brother. And these guys were some of the wealthiest Americans you can imagine. And they both gave their lives over to serve France. And Freddie served very briefly with the Lafayette Escadrille. After Norman's death, his parents pulled strings and had him taken away from the front. But he had kept all of his material from World War I, letters, photographs. You see there on the left, negatives of photographs, which you never get. And all this stuff had been in the steamer trunk and had just gone poof. And in 2018, while we're wrapping this movie, this stuff comes to light. I went up to Newport, Rhode Island, where the family is sort of headquartered, and I spent 4 days up there photographing it. Probably the crown jewel in the whole thing was Freddie's diary of 1916. Here you see photographs of them from the collection. There you see Freddie Jr., Frederick Sr. in the center, obviously, and Norman as children. The father, very, very controlling, definitely had ideas of what his sons should be doing. And the fact that both of them went off to fly, first of all, flying was insane. Why would anyone do that? And then flying in a war, doubly crazy. But they went and did it, and they struck out on their own. And tragically, Norman was killed. And so there you see the two brothers on the right there in their formal portraits in their flying uniforms. On the left, you see a brief letter from their mother to Norman about Victor Chapman's death, the guy we were just talking about. And on the right, you see the diary entry of Frederick talking about, Frederick was finishing his flight training when his brother crashed. He was in southwestern France. Norman was in northeastern France. And he took a series of trains racing across Paris to get to his wounded brother, hearing that Norman was actually recovering and might be doing well. And this diary, for the first time, we read the story of him running up the street in Jardimer, where Norman was in the hospital, and in the middle of the night, and a guy meeting him halfway and telling him it's all over. So to hear the story of the death of Norman Prince, who's a central, critical character to our story, and to hear it told by his brother in his own words for the first time was an incredibly moving thing. Again, a lot of moving moments making this movie, but who better to tell the story than his own brother. A lot of the time while we were making this, I felt like our biggest job was to get out of the way. Just let these guys tell the story that they tell so well.
That's right. Well, while we're in the middle of making this film, Paul called me up and said, you need to go meet Marcel Rockwell. She's going to be in Ohio on a job. She's going to come to Dayton and she's going to bring you a bunch of stuff. And we need to photograph this stuff. So it turns out that Marcel is Giffen Rockwell's great grandniece. Is that right, Paul?
Grandniece. Grandniece. Yeah.
Okay. And so I met Marcel at the Air Force Museum. Great place to meet. We walked around the museum. She had never been there before. And we went back to her car and she pulled out a valise about this big. And it was full of stuff. And she said, this is Giffen Rockwell's, this is what he left behind. So in there were several wrapped packages and about 300 original photographs from World War I. So my job was to scan all those photographs, but I also had the chance to open these packages, which was the things that Giffen Rockwell left behind. And this photograph you're looking at here are what is in Giffen Rockwell's pocket when he was shot down and killed. This is what he had in his pocket. The photograph of Victor Chapman, which you saw earlier, he carried in his pocket. The cigarette case engraved with his name was in his pocket and bent up when the airplane crashed. Derek will ask me if I smoked one of the cigarettes, and I did not. I don't smoke. But the handkerchief was in his pocket, and there are blood stains on it. And his watch that he wore when he was shot down. But the thing that I found the most poignant was that is a piece of his propeller. And in the propeller is French soil, which he died to defend. And I set these things up in my studio and made these photographs. And you must treat these things with reverence. These are not just stuff from a junk store. These are in his what he carried with him when he died. And so you have to really consider what you're doing. And that's the spirit of this film. We spent all these years considering what we were doing. We were telling this story. Here's what he had and is carried with him when he died. And that attitude comes through in the film. I think it as Paul said, we just had to get out of the way. We had to let the stories tell themselves. And that photograph is one example of just letting that happen.
This movie obviously wouldn't be anything without great airplanes. And so Derek and Dan will tell you some more about, there was that question up at the top, what did we do? So
I was rather cavalier about filming the planes because my last film, all the planes we needed were in New Zealand. We're in Peter Jackson's collection. He's built dozens of World War I planes, some with original engines, and the characters I was following really only flew for 2 to maybe 6 months on the outside. So it was a very specific group of British planes, which Peter Jackson had. And I thought we could find the same thing for this film. But, these guys flew throughout the war. William Thaw was flying in 1915 and then with the Americans all the way through 1918. So the planes really changed and we really had to look around for them. Here you will see a Newport 17, 7/8 scale there in the upper part of the photograph, being filmed by our intrepid cinematographer, Matthew Mazza. He is in some sort of contraption called a breezy. I don't know why they call it that, but it had a 1950s era seatbelt that he's strapped in, but we gave him a little extra protection. So the Newport 17, only 7/8 scale, it's a little smaller so that the pilot and his partner, who has an identical plane, can take off the wings, stick them in a trailer, and they drive all over the Midwest to air shows and weekend get-togethers so they can fly their planes around. But there was a little problem with those planes, which Dan solved.
Well, as we met these guys, we discovered, and we wondered why this would possibly even be, that they were in Belgian markings. They're French airplanes, but they're in Belgian markings. So we asked the two pilots, can we repaint the markings? And they said, well, yeah, I guess so, but we want to be able to wash it off. So I consulted my artistic guru, my dad, who is a commercial artist. He's about to be 95 years old. He's still among us. And he said, well, I said, here's the deal. They're painted silver. Paint won't stick to this, what's there. What do I do? And he said, well, that's easy. You use poster paint. This is kindergarten paint, and you mix dish soap with it, and the paint will stick to anything. And so that's what I did. So I had gallon jugs of primary colors, and I repainted the airplanes as French airplanes. I did find some silver poster paint and painted over the star and the comet on the side, but I repainted the markings, repainted the rudders, and I also painted one of the airplanes with the really important original Indian head from the unit. And again, I had to go back to my art school training. I had primary colors, black and white, to work with, so I had to mix all the colors. I had to go back to my early days of art school and color wheel and all that, but it worked. And the airplanes took to the sky as French airplanes. And Matthew, our videographer, cinematographer, who is French, said when he was up in the air for the first time and saw the airplanes in French markings, he got all choked up seeing the tricolor on the French airplanes. And we made the film. And when they needed to go back to the original markings, they used a wet paper towel, and all that hard work got washed away in about 10 minutes. Go back, Paul, one slide, if you would.
Yeah.
We filmed these airplanes in the Laurel Highlands of Pennsylvania, which were a perfect substitute for the countryside of France. But this is actually Pennsylvania, and it's as rural as the French countryside, and it was a perfect background for what we did.
So here we are in France, where we were able to film some French airplanes on French soil. In the upper right-hand corner is a Newport 28, actually flying over Verdun. And Paul and I have been to a French air show in Saint-Dizier, which is in the photograph right below that, where we saw the Patrie de France, the French equivalent of the Blue Angels or the Air Force Thunderbirds fly. And Paul is talking to one of the pilots of the Patrie, whom Paul had met a year before in the French embassy in DC. But we met the pilot of the Newport 28, and he said, you know, the next day I'm going to be flying over Verdun. And so we met another pilot, I think on Facebook is how I became friends with him. And that's his little plane in the upper left-hand corner. And we had to shoot through the glass cockpit, but we were able to get some shots of that plane, which represented one of the planes that James Norman Hall flew at the very end of the war when he was shot down. And then down in the lower left, we're back at the Loxai-les-Bains Air Base. And that's one of the Mirage jets that flies in that active air base. And it's painted in the traditional representational colors of the French ace, Georges Guinemer. And that's, he always called his plane Old Charles. And so it's got his color scheme and his name on it. And that's one of the young French aviators who flies for the French Air Force. But after 4 years of filming, we filmed planes in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, in New York, in Maryland, in Virginia, in California. But we did not have a Newport 11 or 17 up in the air with a German Eindecker. The only flying German Eindecker we could find was in Australia, and we couldn't afford just to go to Australia and film that one plane. We still wouldn't have had a Newport. So we found this intrepid group of remote controlled model flyers called the Long Island Skyhawks. They're actually very strict, organized guys. They fly nothing smaller than quarter scale or third scale planes, and they fly all number of planes, but here's their World War I collection. And in the very center of that panorama photograph is a yellow German Eindecker, and I had had the privilege of filming a real one on the ground. We couldn't fly it in California. So we film it on the ground, and then the next thing you see it up in the air. And from what we've heard, you can't tell it's a model. But on the right side, the second plane in, the green and purple one, is a 1/3 scale German Albatross. And it was a spectacularly beautiful model, all made of wood. It was really amazing. And the first evening we were there filming a little bit, he crashed it and luckily quickly repaired it for filming the next day. But with these model guys, we got the last shots that filled in some of the holes of our aerial sequences that we needed to choreograph.
And what you saw in the 20-minute film is some of the aerial footage that we shot minus the model footage. As Derek just said, this happened right at the end. So when you see the full film and you see actual combat sequences, those were shot. There's such a wild combination of shots that were used. There is a wonderful flying French collection of World War I aircraft in France at Lafayette Escadrille. And on Facebook, I met a French cinematographer who goes there every year to film their air show. And he very kindly, for the right price, licensed us footage of just the right kinds of airplanes we needed. And Derek stitched all of this together. So there's model footage, French footage, California footage. These things all come together. And we have had serious World War I airplane aficionados, lovingly we call them rivet counters, looking at our film, and they can't tell the difference. They're actually kind of surprised when they find out that there were models used in the film. So we're very proud of that. And also love the fact that all the airplanes are actual flying airplanes. There's no computer generated models or anything like that of the aircraft. All the airplanes are flying airplanes.
We did do some special effects that are digital effects for tracers and and another great thing about the models was they could put these models into a death spiral, which no pilot is going to do with a replica World War I airplane. So that was great. But also the paramount, the perfect way in which to attack an enemy plane in World War I was to fly out of the sun so that the target could not see the plane until the last minute. And so I arranged to film early with these guys with the sun behind them. And they were saying, well, the sun won't be on them. You won't be able to see them as well. But we got some beautiful shots of the sun, and the plane appears and then it disappears and then it comes out closer, and just really, really exceptional shots that really make some of these battle scenes come alive.
Absolutely. So we're going to wrap up here. Our mission is almost accomplished. Dan, why don't you tell us about the first time we showed the finished film, or the nearly finished film?
It was Veterans Day weekend at the National Museum of the United States Air Force here in Dayton that we showed the first nearly completed 2-hour film. We had General Goot came from France. Family members were here from Norman Prince family, James Norman Hall family, other members. It was the first time we had seen the film and it was a big screen, IMAX type 100-foot screen, where you think, wow, if there's any mistakes, we're going to see them big. And there aren't any. I mean, there's little things, but the sound was great. Paul's music was fantastic. We showed the film to about almost a full house of 500. The museum put on a wonderful reception for us ahead of time with French 75 cocktails. The museum pulled things of the Escadrille out of collections hadn't been seen in about 50 years. And that was the day after the film. They made a weekend out of it. It was a seminar. It was a magic weekend. And Derek will tell you about showing the film in Santa Barbara. This was in my hometown. So my family was here, people that I know, that I grew up with, and the colleagues and friends are all there. And when it came my turn to speak, I couldn't, because I would have cried. So I didn't. But it was really quite an experience.
It was a wonderful weekend. We had 2 symposia with family members and historians and French Yvonne Gut, who was so much fun. But in the rush to get the film done, we had a very disappointing vendor doing some of the special effects. And so we found out we got into the Santa Barbara International Film Festival for that January. This is January 2020 after Veterans Day 2019. And we had about a month to redo the special effects. And Paul re-edited some of the music, almost all of which is contemporary to the time. Much of it, from French composers of the time, the music that these pilots would have known. And Santa Barbara is my hometown. I've just moved back after years being in Manhattan and Los Angeles. And so for me also it was very satisfying. Old high school friends, my mother, my sisters flew in. It was really, really a lot of fun. And to show Paul around my hometown was also fun.
Yeah, no, it was great to, and again, when you show a film for the first time to a living, breathing audience who has never seen it before, it's thrilling and terrifying.
Absolutely.
You are enthralled with every moment, seeing it all have come together. You're also scrutinizing every last little thing that might be, did we get that? Did we remember that? And just, is the audience reacting? Are they reacting? And they did. And it's just an amazing relief when it's over. And they liked it.
Right.
and it rang true. And they were moved by it. And once again, it's one of those crazy things where, I always told my kids 90% of life is showing up. And we are there, and these 2 older women come up, and out of the blue, in Santa Barbara, 2 more Lafayette Escadrille family members showed up to see our film. They live in Santa Barbara. One is related to Edmund Genet. The other is related to Derek.
Norman Prince.
Norman Prince.
Yeah.
Amazing. Just amazing. So on it goes. And like I said, our mission is almost accomplished. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this. At the Place États-Unis in Paris, the memorial to the American volunteers. That's Alan Seeger, the figure of Alan Seeger at the top. The film is essentially finished. There are a few more things we need to do to it. We had a big fundraising push this past year, which we're still in, to get us that last little bit. There's a number of things that we need to do to make sure that the film gets seen by actual human beings. We are making outstanding progress in this regard. We set our budget. Our major corporate sponsor is FedEx, who gave us the money to finish the film. We went back to them to ask us for the funds to get the film distributed. They said, we will give you half if you can match it. And we did a great job of being able to get to that by the end of last year, which was our deadline. There's a couple of donations that haven't come through yet, and we are hoping to get over the top. FedEx has given us a little bit of extra time. The money that we are raising right now is going toward getting the film released worldwide. And we're currently in negotiations with a Paris-based distributor to do exactly that, to have the film distributed in France as two 1-hour episodes with French narration, as well as the English narration for the English-speaking markets we'd go for, principally, of course, the United States, but then elsewhere in the world. So for broadcast television and for streaming services. And we are now in the process of actually negotiating that. So this is, we're out of pipe dream stage and into hardcore, get it done. The funds go to all the non-glamorous things of filmmaking, insurance, legal, clearances, but all of these things are absolutely necessary. Otherwise, the film never gets seen. We have to have the film completely cleared and signed off. We have to promote the film. So if any of you might be interested in contributing to the film, absolutely any donation, any amount helps us. It is all tax deductible. We are making the film through the nonprofit Humanist Documentary Films Foundation. So if you're so inclined, there is a donate button on our website, LafayetteEscadrille.org, and I believe there's also been a button shared with you previously for this event. If you would consider making a contribution, we'd be so grateful. We're so close to the finish line on this film, and we feel right now, with the way things are, how important it is to share the story of what will be a brand new story, especially for our American audiences, a brand new story that reinforces the epitome of this relationship between France and the United States, that are our oldest ally. And these Americans who went to volunteer as patriotic Americans, the best thing they could do was serve France.
Yeah.
So that's a story we feel is very important to be told right now. We are all interconnected. So if that is something that moves you and you'd be interested in helping us out, we'd be interested to know that you are. So with that, I will leave you our website address, the LafayetteEscadrille.org. And
I'd just like to mention one thing, Paul.
Sure.
We had a deadline with Fred Smith, the founder of FedEx, by December 31st, and we got some pledges that met that date. We're still not sure if it's going to come in, but our budget has been a rather moving target. This is something I proposed to Fred 6 or 9 months ago, and since then we've learned we've learned a lot about other things we need to do. We're also negotiating with PBS, and so we have to do a separate edit for PBS in 2 parts, a separate edit for the French Terranova company in 2 parts, as well as hire a French narrator. And so we're I could name a dollar figure if anybody wants to know, and you can certainly get in touch with us. But every little bit helps. We've had, I'm sure we've had at least 100 donators over the time period, and we're also looking for other corporate sponsors. We could get on 1 or 2 more corporate sponsors if you all know of a company that would like to have their name associated with France and America, and telling this history.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much, you all.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
And we would love to
Thank you.
answer any questions you might have.
Francis?
And you're muted, Francis. There you are.
Thank you very much. First, congratulations. I think it's a wonderful endeavor, wonderful movie. And we're very much looking forward to present it in New York City. So I have a questions concerning the relationship between the Escadrille Lafayette and the Lafayette Flying Corps. And I do that in relations to Eugene Bullard, who you mentioned in the 20 minutes was not part of the Escadrille Lafayette, but was part of the Flying Corps.
Indeed. The Flying Corps wasn't an organized body, but it was sort of a catch-all name for all the Americans that flew for French squadrons in World War I before the United States joined the war. The Lafayette Escadrille is the only all-American squadron.
Right.
But even though you may have seen the photograph, Francis, and I don't know if it's in the 20-minute version, but even though there's a photograph of Eugene Bullard with Victor Chapman and Billy Dugan and Edmund Genet in the Foreign Legion, he flew for a different squadron. And even though I've read a biography of him, there's a recent biography that's come out. I can't remember which squadron it was, but he also suffered for racism. There was an American doctor who founded the American hospital, Eugene.
Edmund Gross.
What was his first name?
Edmund.
Edmund Gross, Groos, and he didn't let Bullard join the Lafayette Escadrille and sort of drummed him out of the air service. And so Bullard went back and fought on the ground after being the first African-American aviator, and an amazing life. And I won't bore you, but if you want, I've made a very short film about Eugene Bullard that is part of our Duke Ellington project, which you can find the Seven Tones Project on Facebook or YouTube. And, this guy fought in 2 world wars. He was a spy for the French. He was a jazz drummer. He was a club owner in Paris. And he ended his life as an elevator operator at Rockefeller Center. Yeah. And Dave Garroway of the Today Show recognized the medals on his elevator boy uniform and brought him on the Today Show about 3 months before he died in 1961. It's an amazing story.
The Paris American Club had an event on him to honor him. And
I'm sorry. I'm boring you all.
No, it's very interesting. And the French veteran, and this is Alain Dupuis, we are honoring his grave in Flushing every year.
Oh.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
That's neat.
We actually found a beautiful photograph of him on the streets of Paris in the 1920s with Ted Parsons, and they're all dressed up during the day in tails on the street. Ted Parsons, one of the other pilots, and I surreptitiously took a snapshot of it in the archives of the Air and Space Museum when we weren't supposed to be taking photographs, and it's in our film.
Who else has a question for us? Laura?
Hi. Firstly, congratulations.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions, actually. The first is, are you familiar with Christiane Amanpour on PBS? You might want to pitch your story to her. She has an excellent program, and it might be a way to get into PBS. I don't know how they work, but I adore her show, and she has stories that I think it would really appeal to her. I don't know how you can get in touch with Amanpour and Company, PBS. That's my
great idea.
Yeah, I love her, so I thought I'd at least share my passion with you. And second, I'm a musician and artist myself. Do you use actors ever in your productions and your films, or is it mostly just documentary?
So far not. Regarding documentaries, I'm a real stickler. I really do not like reenactors. I feel like they take me out of the story, and I start looking at what they're wearing and wondering where they're filming. And so, the most we'll use a hand writing a letter. Right. Maybe show somebody get in the cockpit of an airplane, but we do use voice actors, and those are very, very important to us. But we're also kind of branching out and looking at what other types of films we might make, and having been a former actor myself, I certainly love actors and acting. It's just in historical documentaries,
right.
I don't like using them.
Where may we follow you? Is Twitter the best platform, or is it Instagram? Or do you guys have an actual
I'm embarrassed that I don't use either, but we have a Facebook page. The LafayetteEscadrille.org, thelafayetteescadrille.org, and our email addresses are on there, and we would love to be in touch with all of you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice.
Certainly. I saw Molly had her hand up earlier. Hi, Molly.
Oh, hi there. I'll make this brief. This was just an amazing presentation and work that you all have done. Something came to mind. The question I had, is this suitable for younger audiences?
Great question. I would say the 20-minute film that we made was
Yeah.
For the World War I Commission, they have a very extensive education program, and they wanted our film geared towards high school age students. I just in my own family and friends experience showing it to people in my circle just to get their feedback. A lot of kids have seen it, and it's been fun. That said, it's a long movie. It's 2 hours long. It's made, it was not made for children. There's nothing particularly, it's about a war, so it's inherently violent throughout the whole thing. But in terms of the kind of screen violence that's out there, our film is pretty tame.
I think so.
Except the pictures of crashed airplanes and dead pilots and everything, they're all real. And so what age children are you thinking about?
Well, I was thinking about high school age, and specifically, I just came across a World War I monument that, whereas a Boy Scout Eagle had done his project within the last couple of years on preserving and doing extensive research to reinvigorate this replica of the L'Arc de Triomphe in, of all places, Huntington, West Virginia. There were 8 trees planted that were just stunning along Imperial Boulevard. Each one of those trees was planted in the 1920s for deceased members of that of the American Army that had perished in World War I. So here we have a 14-year-old boy out of Canova, West Virginia, which is not too far from where Homer Hickam and Chuck Yeager are from.
Right. That's right.
And so he has unearthed. I grew up in that town. I have a house there. Long story. I've been in Atlanta for many years, but at any rate, happened to be there and saw the work that this young man had done. Was really kind of blown away, and it made me think they also have the Boy Scout Jamboree in West Virginia. 30,000 scouts gather there annually. So I happen to think there is maybe some potential for this Boy Scout Jamboree or something. I happen to be a Girl Scout leader of 20 years. So, but the Girl Scouts too, perhaps they'd be interested. But I immediately thought of a young man who had done the work to unearth all of those wonderful stories and names of those people that were commemorated at that memorial arch and by the planting of those trees. So anyway, just a thought.
I would say in that case,
thought.
the film is certainly appropriate for high school students.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Molly, has he put anything online that we can see his work?
Yes. He did put it online. I can look up your email address and send you that link so you can check it
That'd
out.
be great.
Oh, if you have the link handy, could you put it in the chat?
Let me see if I can get it handy, and I'll yes.
And Molly, I dated a girl from Huntington, West Virginia for several years.
Oh, really? Well, I want to tell you, my husband's from Santa Barbara.
Is he really?
You see, we won't get into all of that. And a small world.
Yes, it is.
By the way, I have to know it's a small town, so I may know her. She could be my sister. You never know.
Catherine Kelly.
Oh, well, I was very good friends with her younger sister. I know her entire.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, Catherine.
So Catherine's dad owned a coal mine, and
Oh,
at
yeah.
Columbia, where she went to college, her friends called her coal miner owner's daughter.
Yeah,
That's funny.
I'm gonna message you right away. That's wild. The words. That's
And
spectacular.
what's your husband's name, in case I know him, and from Santa Barbara?
Well, he was actually grew up in San Francisco, but he went to school at Santa Barbara, dearly loved it. Jerry Hinckley.
No,
Sure.
didn't know him.
Okay. Well, we will do everything we can to spread the word about this film. Absolutely
Well,
phenomenal.
thank you. That means a lot to us.
Yeah, but no, there's no nudity, there's no, color violence, anything like that.
No
A lot
blood,
of it is
no
in the
gore, it's
words.
Real.
My last film, however, has 4 pictures of French prostitutes. You might want to check that one out.
Okay. saying the scouts might be more interested in that. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, that's true. It depends on which merit badge they're working on.
On that note, I think I'll hit mute. But anyway, Kelly.
Any other questions?
Just a comment, if I may. 3 comments. One is I saw the first film, The Millionaires Brigade, and it was marvelous.
Oh, thank
I
you.
also saw Peter Jackson's wonderful recreation of the World War I battles, which is incredible. And third and most important, I'm from New York. There are no good bagels in Silver Spring.
Oh, okay, to be fair, we weren't saying are there good bagels, but which are the best of what we can get here.
Oh, you're splitting hairs now.
Totally splitting hairs. Totally splitting hairs. But, you know, here we are. If you want a bagel, you got to do the best you can, right?
That's
guess
right.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
you're
very
welcome.
much.
I knew that one would come back to bite me at some point.
If there, Paul, Dan, Darroch, amazing. You did a wonderful presentation and incredible work on this film. It's just really, really inspiring, and we're so grateful for your joining us tonight. And we'll try to get the word out as best we can, and try to get any donations that we can
thank
drum
you.
up, and anything else that we can do to help support it. And of course, you know, once normalcy hopefully comes back soon, you're welcome to join us for a dinner at the National Arts Club, and
We'd
maybe
love
a
to do that.
presentation. We can work on that with Francis. So thank you
Wonderful.
so much, and thank you all for joining us tonight. So bravo.
Many
Well,
thanks to you all. Thank
very
you.
much. Yeah.
We so appreciate the opportunity. Thank
And
you.
we'll put this on video on our website as well.
Oh, okay.